Okay, it should be recording. Hi everyone, I'm Sophia and welcome to the Minorities in Biological Research first workshop. This workshop is a graduate school Q&A, so we have two grad students who will do a little presentation on their research, how they got to grad school, and then also what grad school looks like for them. And then following that, we'll have a little Q&A where you can ask them questions. And then once that's complete, we have a talk after that, discussing extra resources about mentorship, internships, and financing research. And so minorities in biological research was established last year, but today's our first workshop, which we're quite excited about. It came about summer last year when I was talking to Christina, one of our team members, about providing some sort of information session to fellow minority students, because right now I'm in the MATS lab and I've learned quite a lot about like his research, but also pursuing graduate school. And without having her having access to her and the lab, I don't think coming to that information would have been quite easy, or maybe I would have gotten it too late. So I was quite grateful to have it, and I think it's important to share this information with fellow minority students so they can figure out if they're interested in biological research, then get involved and pursue their passion in it. And so our mission is just to host workshops. We target undergraduate minority students, and we just want to provide information about research opportunities, getting started in research, the pathway to a PhD, and what graduate school looks like. And so for today's workshop, it's the graduate school Q&A, and we'll have two panelists, and then that'll be followed by a talk about undergraduate research opportunities. And so our two panelists are Brianna and Annalisa, and they'll have a 7-minute talk each. And I'll stop screen sharing so Brianna can go first. Right, Brianna?
Sorry, everyone. I don't know why it's jumping around. Here we go. I'll try this again. Okay, can everyone see that okay? Good, okay. My mouse is freaking out. Okay, so I guess very briefly, just who I am if you haven't seen the website and whatnot. My name is Brianna. I'm a 4th year student in the Myers lab, and I focus on disease ecology. See if I can get it to switch left. There we go. I guess just kind of jumping into where I started a little bit without going too far back. I did my undergrad at the University of Arizona. I was really interested in studying how wildlife health is impacted by human actions. So I was really trying to understand health impacts And I thought the only way that I could do that is to have a veterinary degree. And then I found out about the wildlife program at the University of Arizona. So I switched from that to, I switched from veterinary science to the wildlife biology program. And then I kept veterinary science as a minor. So kind of diving into the research that I did as an undergrad, I had these few opportunities starting in Dave Christensen's lab in the School of Natural Resources and the Environment in Arizona. I started off just doing some photo analysis, so identifying animals in photos, and I did that as school credit. That way I could make it part of my schedule but not lose work hours because I was also working a lot as an undergrad. Then I applied to some different research programs that were available through my university. So the undergraduate biology research program, I continued to work in Dr. Christensen's lab, but did more wildlife endocrinology work. So that's a selfie with some fecal samples from probably bison or Sonoran pronghorn. And then when I finished with the UVERT program, I moved on to the DDCSP, the Doris Duke Conservation Scholars Program. And that's probably something that I'm going to highlight the most in this presentation. I had the most experience getting research experience with that and actually having experience presenting at conferences. So that picture in the top right corner is me presenting at ESA to the former president of ESA, the Ecological Society of America. And I actually didn't know that was him when I was giving the presentation at the time, but it was still fun. So specifically the Doris Duke Conservation Scholars Program, the one that I was in, had 5 collaborating universities that had, they brought us all together for leadership training. So there were 5 students from each of the 5 universities. So it says the University of Florida, it was based at the University of Florida. But it included 2 paid summer internships, graduate school preparedness, some mentorship and conference attendance. And then there was some additional support afterwards where they bring all of the Doris Duke programs, not just the one that I was in, but at the different universities. So that'll show up in the opportunities later that there's other Doris Duke Conservation Scholars programs where you don't have to necessarily attend that university to apply. So I wanted to highlight that, and I can answer more questions about that in the panel, the Q&A. But to briefly talk about some of my summer stuff, I got to do some work studying greyhawks and bighorn sheep populations in Arizona. And then my second internship, I got to pick where I wanted to go. So wanting to study wildlife health, I went to the WIL, which is called the Wildlife Investigations Lab in Sacramento with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. So I did necropsies, I transported tissues to UC Davis for disease diagnostics. And then also we would get some wildlife that needed to be rehabbed and looked at. And that's when I actually found out about disease ecology, which led me to applying to UT. I applied to UT. I only applied to one school, and for reasons that my husband was stationed at Fort Hood in Texas, so I only applied to UT. Not necessarily that I would recommend that, but I wanted to throw that out that it was the only one that I applied to. And I contacted Dr. Lauren Myers. I called her and I was really interested in understanding the quantitative background parts relating to disease work, but I still wanted to do some field work and other things. And my current work right now is looking at spatial, socioeconomic, and ecological factors of a couple of different diseases. So you might have heard of COVID by this point. one of my projects in collaboration with Emily Javin has been looking at hospitalization incidents in Austin, Texas, and some of the factors that may be in play relating to those hospitalizations. So we took the social vulnerability index that was developed by the CDC and some other variables that were more aggregated at the zip code level to see which ones were significant predictors of hospitalizations. And it seemed to be that the strongest linear prediction at this point with this analysis was the percentage below poverty. And this was work that was done with the COVID-19 Modeling Consortium. And then another project relating to that, which is more of my actual dissertation work, is looking at some ecological factors in combination with socioeconomic factors for marine typhus, which is a flea-borne disease that is endemic to Texas and kind of increasing in the last few years. And then my last part about my other ongoing projects, just looking at anthropogenic and environmental impacts on disease. So still within the marine typhus system, I'm working on getting some possum samples and fleas and ectoparasites to look into disease prevalence on a gradient of urbanization, so rural, suburban, and urban. On marine typhus, potentially Chagas disease, and Bartonella. And that's it. See if I can stop sharing. Oh. Oh, I'm sorry for the technical difficulties. There we go.
Thank you so much, Brianna. And then our next panelist will be Annalisa.
Also having technical difficulties, one sec. Okay. Okay, can everyone see this? Okay, sweet. Yeah, so my name is Annalisa Shields Estrada. I'm a PhD candidate in the same program as Brianna, the EEB program in the Department of Integrative Biology. I'm also a fourth year PhD student, and I'm in the lab of David Canatella. So pretty much I'm an evolutionary ecologist studying frogs. And so I study an array of frogs in both the northern and southern hemisphere. So the frog on the left here is a frog we have here in Texas, the green tree frog. So I do some work locally here in Texas, and I also do some work in the tropics. And so in the middle here, we have the red-eyed tree frog, which is kind of like the poster child of frogs. You've probably seen it on a lot of postcards and things. And then on the right here, we have a lesser known frog. It's actually one of the poison frogs, the phantasmal poison frog, which is found in Ecuador. And so I work on all of these frogs found both locally in Texas and down in the tropics. But first I want to start with how did I get from here? So here's a picture where I was like about 8, climbing a tree, looking really, really enthused about getting to be outside and in nature, to here 18 years later, where here I am in Ecuador with my field team and everyone's holding up their bags full of frogs. So I want to talk a little bit about my journey to getting from one of those places to where I am now. And so the biggest thing for me that probably got me to grad school was just my access to nature. And so that's a huge privilege, and something that I really hope to, I really hope to expand everyone's access to nature. And that's kind of one of my main life goals. But for me, I was really lucky, and I grew up on the central coast of California, with the Pacific Ocean and the redwood forest just minutes away. And so I really fell in love with nature and decided I wanted to, pursue science in some way, based on, the ecosystems that were right around me. And I think my favorite creature growing up that really got me into science was the Tarica newts, that you see right here. And so these I can find just, right close to my house. And they were always just such like a little treat to find. Like I was always so excited. And so these are my favorite little creatures growing up. They have really toxic skin. And I didn't even know that. So all the precautions that, you should follow now, like not immediately eating right after touching them or anything. I didn't do any of that. Here I am. But yeah, it's fun to, know about them in a scientific context after you've like played with them as a kid. And so that's been like an interesting thing to reflect on, coming back to those same creeks and seeing those animals and, knowing so much more about them than I did before. And the other really important thing that brought me here was my undergraduate experience. So here's a silly picture of me in the middle with a couple glass frogs hanging out. And so these are some really small, cute frogs that I like a lot. And on the left and right are pictures of San Vito, Costa Rica, which is down in the south by the Panamanian border. And there's a field station here called Las Cruces. And that's where I did a lot of my undergrad work. And so I went to Stanford for undergrad. I got a BS in biology with an ecology and evolution specialization and a minor in mathematics. I actually started as a math major because I really like computational stuff and quantitative stuff. And I think it's like what comes most easily to me. And science is a little bit, feels like less intuitive. But I quickly decided when I started working in some labs that, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do with math. And I really knew what I would want to do with science. I really knew I just like wanted to get out in nature and do some work with animals. And so I quickly switched to that major instead. And so I had the opportunity to do this really awesome field work in Costa Rica. And this was through Dr. Gretchen Daly and Dr. Elizabeth Hadley's labs. And a lot of this field work was kind of population genetics and conservation oriented. And that was really exciting for me. So my undergraduate fieldwork was focused on how habitat affiliation determines population structure and genetic diversity in Costa Rican amphibians and reptiles. And so I got to work on this diverse array of frogs. On the left and right, you see these two tree frogs, and in the middle is that glass frog that I was holding in the previous picture. And so granted, undergrad fieldwork is pretty different than grad fieldwork, even if it is your own project. It's just a lot less stressful. And so at this point, I was pretty just like enamored with going and doing, fun fieldwork in beautiful places. And I really liked kind of the conservation aspect of the labs I was working with and of my work as well, because this area is really fragmented landscape. And so I was looking at barriers to gene flow in these species. And a lot of those barriers were these, human-made barriers, like deforestation. And so this project really excited me. And I was pretty sure just kind of right away that I wanted to continue working in science. But I wasn't ready to keep going at full speed right after undergrad. And so I had a little transition between undergrad and grad school. And so I took 2 years off working as a research assistant. 1 year I was learning coding and doing a bunch of coding for this one team of researchers. And another year I was taking care of this anole colony. And so those were both pretty fun things to do, but I was also learning. And in the meantime, I spent a bunch of time applying for grants, where by that I mostly mean the NSF GRFP, which I was lucky enough to know about because I was in an undergrad lab that told me those things. I was also just trying to learn more, like figure out like what in the world exactly did I want to do. And so the first year I applied to grad school, I applied after only 1 year, and I kind of had this idea that, oh, I don't know, I want to just like do things, like do some science. And it wasn't very like, I didn't have nearly a good enough idea. And so I actually decided to not go that year and kind of take another year to really figure out what it was that I wanted to do. And really like what sorts of questions did I need to be asking. And so going from undergrad to grad school, it definitely made me kind of just have to kind of narrow down some of the things I was really interested in pursuing in terms of like questions and hypotheses. And I'm really glad I ended up taking 2 years. It was the right decision for me. So just some grad school tips that I found, that I would have maybe liked to receive in the transition period are to contact professors early via a cover letter and CV, to spend ample time researching grad program schools and topics. I found myself applying for, in the first round, schools and grad programs that I didn't actually like end up wanting to go to, and they didn't really fit. So, just take as much time as you need to figure out where you want to go, what you want to do. To me, it doesn't seem like there's a huge rush if you are obviously able to find jobs in the meantime. And I really like taking some time off to just figure out what it was exactly that I wanted to do instead of just like go, 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 go. I also found it really helpful to apply to the NSF GRFP early. So I actually applied a couple times, before grad school, because you're not docked for that unless the rules have changed. Look it up first. But I found it helpful to just start, getting experience with that sort of thing early. And luckily I knew about it. Yeah, so in my mind, no rush to begin a program right after undergrad if you can find a job. Another thing is that advisor fit is super important. And lastly, just, look out for yourself and your mental well-being. That's actually the most important. So if you need to take more or less time off because of that, if you, need to spend more or less time looking for a specific advisor or funding, just give yourself that. It's going to make, your years in the graduate school way better to really value, those things about yourself and put yourself first. So yeah, in graduate school, here's a couple pictures on the left of my field team in 2019. And here we are in Ecuador where we're finding poison frogs. On the right is also a place in Ecuador where we find poison frogs. And in the middle are these canyons out west of the Davis Mountains out in West Texas. And so these are some of the places I do field work. And so, yeah, a lot of my field work is in Ecuador and Texas, as I've said. And so just to throw out some keywords for, what sorts of things I do. So my work really revolves around thermal ecology, ecophysiology, color biology, and phylogenetics. And here you see me doing some experiments on frogs and some frogs, being subjected to these experiments. So I do these different ecophysiology experiments to try to answer my main question. And my main question is, how do ecological selection pressures drive thermoregulatory adaptation? So I'm trying to understand how, animals that are really sensitive to their environment, such as frogs, adapt to, these changing thermal conditions that they're having to face. And I'm wondering if color potentially plays an important role in that. So I answer these questions in a few ways. I use diverse families of frogs from both North and South America, as I've talked about. I perform these ecophysiology experiments. I do field work, which would be completely impossible without a field team, which is always wonderful. And I also try to make sure that that field team is largely comprised of people from those places where I'm doing the field work. I have to do a little bit of lab work, a ton of reading and writing, and some coding in R. Yeah, thank you.
All right, cool. I'll take it from here. Yeah, these were some fabulous talks. I think our students are going to benefit so much from this, and it was also cool on the administrative side of things to learn more about our colleagues. So this was just wonderful. So for the students who are here right now, maybe go ahead and feel free to ask questions. We're going to have a Q&A for the next 20 minutes. So go ahead and feel free to raise your virtual hand or just write a question in the chat box. And while you're doing that, in the meanwhile, I can go ahead and ask some questions that we have for you. But so for both of you, so Annalisa and Brianna, the first question that we have here is, how is graduate school different by and large from undergrad? And did you sort of feel prepared for graduate work when you were there? So whoever wants to start with that, Annalisa or Brianna, go ahead.
I could start. Yeah, I would say it's drastically different. You know, it's just so much more responsibility. It's your project. You know, it's not like, yeah, it's not anyone else's. A lot of times the experiences in undergrad are at least, you know, maybe indirectly helping some other bigger project or helping, you know, a grad student. Even when I did my own like thesis, and I still didn't really feel like, I don't know, any of the pressure that I feel now. And then, you know, depending on who your advisor is and the relationship with your lab and stuff, I mean, it can be completely almost like a solo mission. And that can be really hard, you know. Of course, you can get help from a number of faculty and people, but it's always you having to reach out. You know, few people are going to come help you. It's you, you know, going and getting the help. And so it's pretty, you know, in my experience has been almost completely unidirectional and like me seeking help. I find that really challenging. So, I mean, it's just like very independent. It can also feel like pretty self-focused. If you're working on a project that's mostly your own and not a lab project, you're like really, you know, kind of doing it for you, doing it to like continue your career. And that can feel challenging when you know, it's like kind of like not very externally motivated. It's like a lot of internal motivation, I would say. So yeah, I mean, I would just say it's very much more challenging than undergrad is the main comparison.
I definitely agree with Annalisa that there are some challenges. I kind of feel like it somewhat feels like a different set of challenges. When you're in undergrad, you're focused more on the actual coursework and some of the internships that are a bit more applied and then completely developing your own projects. I mean, students that have experience in some of these research programs that I'm mentioning, or having an honors thesis and things, they kind of have an idea of what it's like to have to develop a project and things on your own. This is probably the most speaking up for myself I have ever done in my life, which is, I feel like that's really the hardest part, is a lot of the mental blocks on feeling capable. Because I went straight from undergrad to grad school, and I feel like I was prepared decently through the Doris Duke Conservation Scholars Program because I had some graduate preparedness things. But I feel like there's still some things about grad school that you don't really feel entirely prepared for.
Cool. Okay. And then I guess on a related note to that, what would you say students who are undergrads right now can do to sort of best prepare for graduate work? Maybe both at the level of like courses, or some of you had some, Annalisa, you had a few tips in your talk and that type of thing, but maybe at the level of like research too, yeah, mental health grants, just sort of the whole works around that.
Oh.
Go ahead.
I guess I was just going to give some tips on kind of putting out some feelers, maybe towards instructors and maybe some of their graduate students if they're interested in mentoring or just giving bits of advice, like applying for the GRFP, having some people around that are willing to help read through your proposal. That's something that definitely helped me when I was applying for the GRFP, is having some peers looking through those things, or people who have been successful in advising students in applying for those things. And then I know that it's difficult to find positions or like internships and things that are paid and it's hard to lose work hours and other things. So even just getting your foot in the door with a lab, I don't know what the options are here at UT, but things like independent study so that it's actually part of your school schedule. Yeah, and definitely making sure you have some mental support throughout the application process because it can be kind of draining.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think the most useful thing for me was to get involved with undergrad research, and I did that just by like emailing a bunch of professors. And also, my university had something where you could like apply to help an undergrad with their, to help a grad student with their like field work in the summer, and that was like paid and everything. So that was really nice. And it was like, a little grant you got to help them, and you could like choose which project you could apply for, like rank your preferences of which fieldwork project. And so those were two main things I did to get involved. But I would say if I hadn't been involved in like undergrad research and had close ties with the lab, I'm sure I wouldn't have known, almost anything. So that would definitely be my number one thing, just to try to get involved, with research, or just like even start going to a lab meeting early so that you figure out like what even is grad school. What is this whole process?
Great. And then sort of building off of that, so how did you sort of take that initial step to get that research position? You said that you kind of find opportunities or go to meetings and stuff, but maybe as an undergrad when you're not as confident or you're just getting started, what would be a good way to kind of get yourself to that point where you can start a research position or you can find opportunities?
I think like, a lot of times, I mean, we get a million emails, but some of those emails probably are about some useful things. And I think for me, I just like, saw an email, like I just really looked for like summer money opportunities. And I feel like most undergrad institutions probably have some like emails going out about that. And so just to really jump on all of those. And then, yeah, I mean, just emailing a professor was really helpful for me as well. And you might have to email like 10, but hopefully someone will respond. So reaching out to a professor was like the step one for me. And then, yeah, just looking for, any sort of money opportunities for the summer.
I found out about the trail camera stuff just because it was at the beginning of a PowerPoint of one of the lectures I went to one day. So I was like, it has to be worth a shot to ask. But then also there's some opportunities through clubs that I found, and having some friends that may have already been involved in research, I kind of asked them how they do it, because someone in your same age group or year and stuff, it feels like it's a little more approachable to ask them how they did that, how they reached out. I will also say too that if you're reaching out to professors, don't be afraid to send follow-up messages if you don't hear back for like a couple of weeks, because they get that influx of emails and other things, and it may not be that they didn't want to respond to it, it's just that they didn't see it.
Okay, great. So this is something both of you sort of highlighted in your presentations. Like Brianna, you went straight to graduate school, and Annalisa, you took some time off before matriculating in our graduate program here. So what was kind of the motivation behind that decision? Like, why did you decide to, or not to take time off before grad school, and sort of how do you reflect on that experience, and how do you benefit sort of either way from that type of thing?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I personally couldn't imagine having not taken time off. Like it's just so mentally, emotionally, physically like tolling, school in general, but specifically grad school, that for me, I just needed like a break to just, do something other than like thinking in this way. Like I just needed to like not be in school for, however many years straight that was going to be. So I don't know, sometimes in the PhD, I can feel like, I'm not, you're not entirely experiencing like the world how you might be otherwise. Like we don't have like a 9-to-5 job and those things. As much as we can try to keep ourselves on schedules, I feel like work and life feel like they blend a lot more than they do in other places. And so for me, it was helpful to like have a couple of years where I really was working a job and I could like, be done when I got home and stuff. It kind of felt like I had like, some more freedom before jumping back into this. So I think, mentally for me, it was certainly really helpful to know I had taken those 2 years off.
So after I had graduated and I moved up to Texas with my husband, I didn't know whether or not I was going to come to UT. So I was applying for jobs and other things, and for like a couple of months, I worked as a vet technician or a kennel technician at Westlake Hospital. And I do think that I could have benefited from a bit more time off from that. But I also don't entirely regret going straight to grad school, just because as soon as I learned about disease ecology and that it was a way that I can study diseases and wildlife and people's zoonoses without having to get a medical degree or a veterinary degree, I just knew that's exactly what I wanted to do. So I do feel like I burned out kind of early in grad school, and I had some of my own personal things there's things that come up with having to speak up for yourself and actually advocate for yourself that I had to deal with. Not saying that if you took time off and stuff, you don't have to deal with burnout and those things, but I definitely had that go, 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 go mentality. And then I realized that I had to slow down a little bit and learn how to manage all of that and give my brain the time off that it needs. So I feel like, too, like what Annalisa was saying, having that a bit more structure and stuff, I think can help with the understanding, okay, I need time away from staring at computer screens and all of these extra things.
Great. Okay, thank you for your kind of individual perspectives and experiences with that. So the next question is on, we have a question about sort of the more the admission side of things for graduate school. How might a student ask for a letter of recommendation from a faculty? And especially if you like haven't had the opportunity to maybe work with the professor as much and you may not know them as well, or perhaps it was a large course. What's some advice you might give about that?
You can go first, Annalisa.
I was like, how do I gesture in Zoom? Yeah, so I would say that, it's always a little bit tough when you're not really sure if they would be the best letter writer. But I would say, I think most professors are familiar with what you're talking about. And they're kind of like ready to receive the question, even if their answer is going to have to be, I might not be the best choice. And so I would say, if you have had experience working with them, I would just say, this is what I'm planning on doing. This is where I'm planning on applying. I was wondering if you'd be willing to write a letter just upfront. But if you yourself really do have like doubts about, maybe they just don't know me well enough, I haven't gotten to work with them really directly or anything, you could just say, I'm wondering if you think you would be able to, write a letter for me. Like if you like know me well enough, if you've had enough experience interacting with me, individual perspectives and experiences with that. So the next question is on, we have a question about sort of the more the admission side of things for graduate school. How might a student ask for a letter of recommendation from a faculty? And especially if you like haven't had the opportunity to maybe work with the professor as much and you may not know them as well, or perhaps it was a large course, what's some advice you might give about that?
You can go first, Annalisa.
I was like, how do I gesture in Zoom? Yeah, so I would say that, yeah, it's always a little bit tough when you're not really sure if they would be the best letter writer. But I would say I think most professors are familiar with what you're talking about, and they're kind of like ready to receive the question, even if their answer is going to have to be, I might not be the best choice. And so I would say if you have had experience working with them, I would just say, this is what I'm planning on doing. This is where I'm planning on applying. I was wondering if you'd be willing to write a letter just upfront. But if you yourself really do have like doubts about, maybe they just don't know me well enough, I haven't gotten to work with them really directly or anything, you could just say, I'm wondering if you think you would be able to, write a letter for me. Like if you like know me well enough, if you've had enough experience interacting with me, no worries. If not, I mean, I think just always being direct is the move, just be honest. Like, I know we haven't had a lot of time to interact, but I'm looking for letter writers for this. I was wondering if you think that you would be a good fit for that. If not, no worries. They're ready to receive those kinds of, queries. So it might feel awkward for you, but I think for them, it's probably fine.
Yeah, I mean, on top of being able to answer your questions about curriculum in that class, I'm sure that they would be willing to at least give some sort of answer to that. And I definitely agree with putting out feelers and making sure that the instructor feels comfortable with being able to advocate on your behalf in that way. And there's some things too that they may ask you for to include in a letter of recommendation. So they may ask you about some of your extracurriculars, maybe some examples of skills that you have or qualities that you really want to emphasize for your application. So say if you're applying to a specific university and they actually have some guidelines of what they want from instructors, I think as soon as the instructor agrees to write you a letter, and it would be good to provide them with that sort of information. So the university wants to know this about me. Here's some examples that you can provide from your own life too, because they can also work that into the letter.
Cool. Okay. So the next question is about it's kind of an interesting question. So for a student maybe who has to work and they have a job that isn't in a lab or related to a field of research that they might be interested in pursuing, what can they do kind of alternatively to prepare for graduate school and a research position? Like what's a way to kind of make that work? Do you guys sort of think?
I mentioned before one of the very first research-ish opportunities or working in a lab that I got was responding to that trail camera thing where I actually got like course credit for it. So it actually replaced a chunk of time that would have been taken up by a class during that semester. So I would definitely look into that if it's difficult to find any paid opportunities. I think it's always good to look into both because I was working 2 jobs at the time and I just knew that there wasn't a way I was going to be able to give up work time to do that. So getting involved in my foot in the door with that lab and having that independent study credit that could go towards my degree was really helpful.
Yeah, I second what Brianna was saying. Like I also was working and I was working just one job. And luckily it was like flexible, like I could try to put it around my research. But I also was getting credit for the research I was doing like during the year with the lab, which I think at minimum, like labs should be able to give you credit. But I also think that there's in all my summer stuff with the labs though, I did get paid for. And so I think there's a push, to really try to compensate people fairly for their research right now, because it does disadvantage people if, you have to, sacrifice time that you could be like making money at a real job doing this, and then you end up with less experience. That's also really unfair. also something that I know some labs are pushing for is to kind of evaluate people based on, you know, maybe a little bit differently than we have in the past. So thinking, okay, if you're, you know, let's say you had to take care of like a younger sibling, or you had to do like XYZ job. Well, you learn a bunch of leadership and responsibility skills. You learn these same things that we might be looking for in, you know, someone who's been a field tech or a lab tech. And so I would also, you know, encourage the person, if they get to that point of, you know, writing an application and they feel like, well, a lot of my experience has been like not in actual science or research, I would urge them to write about what it is they have done. And, you know, I would really hope that our field's moving in a direction where those sorts of things are listened to and heard and taken, you know, credibly and, you know, as their own sorts of experience, just as, you know, more types of like usual stereotypical research experience are taken very seriously. So yeah, if you do have to work, like, and I hope that, you know, whoever's going to be your mentor will take that, like, you know, we'll understand that and won't be like, oh, you didn't have this experience, but we'll be able to try to understand what skills could you have gained from your specific situation.
Okay, great. I think we have time for a few more questions. So the next one is about the financial costs of attending graduate school. And of course, in sort of ecology and evolution, there's a stipend, a yearly stipend that's generally pretty small. And then it gets sort of tricky with respect to some master's programs, you have to pay for them and whatnot. But what was sort of, I guess, your experiences managing the finances of grad school, sort of on your stipend and like weighing sort of financial considerations during the whole grad school process? And then also, what would you recommend to undergraduates with respect to sort of financial considerations in this whole process?
That was a big question. I definitely, when I was applying, before I knew exactly what it meant to go to grad school, I had no idea how I was going to finance it. I had no idea that there were things called funded positions. And that's something that I talked to my biostat students when I TA about with funding opportunities. And it really depends on the institution and the program and things. That like here at UT, depending on the program, we do have those stipends and like potential for making sure we're supported through insurance and things like when we're TAing or we're graduate research assistant. But then I talked to other people at different universities and they have to pay for those things out of pocket. So any time that you maybe get some sort of warning about changes in timing when you're getting paid for funding, it's definitely important to think about those things a little bit ahead of time. Like when we switch per se from like a fellowship, because we have different funding opportunities throughout our graduate career. So switching from like a fellowship to being a TA, the payroll and the benefits are actually different. So trying to get an idea of what that may mean for you in your bank account wise and things like saving, because a whole month may be kind of offset from the timing of your pay, which has been a big problem here. And then also thinking about budgeting. I feel like that's something that a lot of undergrads may not have that much trouble with, because I feel like managing money when you're living on your own is still kind of a big skill and priority that you need to have. But now with maybe including like medical insurance and dental insurance and things to actually take care of yourself might chip away a little bit at those stipends.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you know, money is fairly tight in grad school, and how tight or not it is mostly dependent on, yeah, the program, the cost of living where you are, but also, you know, here at UT, there's a pretty big range of money that people are making. Like there's, you know, probably like, you know, a few $1,000 difference between, you know, like the NSF stipend and the like minimum UT grad school stipend. So everyone's experience is pretty different. And, one thing that I didn't really know about at the time, but in retrospect, you can try to talk with your advisor as you're getting recruited. And, once you've gotten like an offer about like, hey, is there another fellowship we could try to get for me? Like, hey, maybe like you received an offer that's a little bit higher someone else. You can try to fight for yourself to kind of get like a better package than you might have been initially offered. And that's something that I would, say that people it's certainly not the most comfortable thing to fight for, but I know people do it, and that can, really change your experience, because just making, $4,000 more a year can be a big weight off your shoulders. Something I've found helpful in budgeting is, like something that's a fixed cost is your housing. And so, I've chosen to live somewhere that's significantly cheaper than my peers, but I do have to deal with like, something kind of breaking down every week or two. So it's certainly tolling. I mean, that's kind of, the literal price I'm paying for a cheaper rent. For me, it's been worth it, but, I guess you kind of have to give up a little bit of something, right? Whether that's like a little bit not as nice of a place to live, or just being more careful about going out and eating and drinking. So I would say I have like a comfortable situation, but you definitely just need to be like fairly thoughtful. And you can also see if there's other ways to kind of get some increased like money for like fellowship wise. So I know that UT has like eco labs, and I think you can get some like summer funding and stuff through that beyond just like a research fund. So UT does do a really good job giving us research funds, and so that's nice to not have to like worry that you're gonna have to be taking those out of your own pocket. But that's not the case at all schools. And still your stipend is what you're pocketing at the end of the day.
Great.
Sorry. I was gonna mention something about having like family compromises and stuff as well with like the stipends and other things. Like I don't actually live in Austin. I live in Georgetown. And I used to live in Liberty Hill and even further than that, and not necessarily entirely for money reasons, but there's some things to consider too with the cost of living in Austin. I do think that our department tries its best kind of to make sure that students feel supported in that. And I feel like if you're going to be interviewed and stuff at universities, you should feel more than welcome asking about the cost of living and how well compensated the graduate students are for that. Because driving, like all the driving that I was doing first year was really difficult.
All right, great. Thank you for that. This was really informative and really fantastic. All right, so we're gonna turn it over now to you, Christina. Talk about extra resources.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I have a few things to just go over if you're an undergrad considering finding a research position here at UT or going to grad school. So I'm going to go over just 3 things in this. I'm going to try to make it no more than 10 minutes. But the first one is finding a mentor, which was hugely important for getting letters of rec, and preparing for grad school, and then finding funding to go to grad school. Because if it wasn't clear already, you should not ever have to pay to go to grad school. You should be paid to be in grad school. So to find a mentor, a great way to do that is to join a research lab here on campus. And the most effective way I think that you can do this is to just go to the CNS, if you're in the College of Natural Sciences, to go to their faculty research website and just click on like faculty and research. And it's not working right now, but you just go there, click through the faculty. You can organize it by research. So for example, I am in a lab here and I study how climate change impacts coral reefs. And so I would just go down to like maybe marine science, if that was something that I was considering working in or that would excite me, and just look through what everybody studies. And then you can send them an email. Say that you're an undergrad, you're interested in working, you would love to have a conversation about it. If you would like to have more information about how to just like write that email, if that part sounds scary to you, then we have a great pamphlet for you guys called Getting into Grad School, and you can just like use the example of an email to a faculty member in there and just change it to make it your own. A second way to find a mentor is there's a new program called Step It Up, and I don't think it's started yet. I think it had some setbacks because of COVID, but when it starts to become advertised, keep an eye on it because it will match you in a research position with a mentor in CNS. And the last thing is internships. In REU, if you haven't heard about it yet, is probably the most widely known and respectable NSF funded research internship for undergrads. And this will just happen over like a 10-week period in the summer. They will pay you to go there, they'll pay you to work on it, and then it's probably the most likely chance that you'll have a publication or be on a publication when you're done with that internship. So that will make you extra competitive for grad school. And I think that one of the easiest ways to find an REU is to go to pathwaystoscience.org. And you can just find when they're at so many different universities. You could do it with, I did one with the US Forest Service. You can go to pretty much any location in the US that you might be interested in. So to find a very research heavy paid internship, I would look for an REU on this website. Other ways that you can get an internship, LSAMP, the Lewis Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation, is a nationally recognized NSF funded group. And there is a group that's organized across the entire University of Texas system. I was in LSAMP when I was an undergrad, and they paid for me to do undergrad research. All I had to do was join, and it didn't require anything else from me. I never had to show up for any kind of meetings or anything. They're just trying to improve minority participation in research. But unfortunately, you can only do this in Texas. If you were looking to go elsewhere, there's some other options. One of the ones I would recommend is LSAMP Costa Rica, which the applications are still open. And I know some people that have done this. It'll just match you with a research project out in Costa Rica, and it'll fly you out there. They'll pay for everything for you the entire time. And then some other ones to note, these are just a few. There are so many more though, but I would Google the SEEDS partnership, the SPUR, Summer Opportunities. This is a ecology focused summer internship. All of these are paid, by the way. And then Brianna already touched on the Doris Duke Conservation Scholars, which is a 2-year program. It goes over 2 summers, but also great. So these are all great ways to find a mentor to get your foot in the door with research. If you're interested in going to grad school, it can be difficult to find labs that are taking new PhD students or master students, whatever you're interested in. So a few things that I would suggest doing are to subscribe to listservs. I think that probably the biggest one is Ecolog. You could just Google Ecolog. It might be one of the first ones, but it's a listserv. They send me an email every day, and honestly, I still read it even though I'm pretty settled into my position. But every day there's like 20 or so new jobs or grad student positions, and everybody across, it's not even just in the USA, it's everywhere. They're all posting in there. So that's probably one of the first places you can find labs that already have, these are labs that usually already have a funded position. So if they know what they want a grad student to work on, they say, I have a project, I need a grad student for this. Another one is the Hub. I'm subscribed to them too. They send out a email or a newsletter every week, and these tend to be, they'll be some of the same things as Ecolog. There's some overlap there. And the last one, if you're interested in wildlife specifically, or marine or anything ecology, the Texas A&M Wildlife Job Board is, I don't think they have a listserv, but you can check on their website. The thing I'll say about them though, is that I think they get so many applicants. Everybody checks this one. So it's pretty competitive, but I would definitely keep your eye on these 3 things. The second way to find positions that might actually be even more important than the first step that I mentioned is science Twitter. And I did not take science Twitter very seriously when I was an undergrad because I didn't really understand it, but it's just like, it's not even just a young people thing. This is PIs, older professors, researchers everywhere all have a Twitter. They post whenever they have new positions open in their lab. They post whenever they put out new papers. They post what they're working on. And so just kind of like normal social media, you get to see what other labs are working on and choose which ones you would be most excited to join. So I think that as an undergrad, it's a great time to start a science Twitter just so you can just start following what other people are working on, because it'll never go away. I think as you just grow as a grad student, it's going to be more important to have a presence on science Twitter. And by science Twitter, I just mean you make a Twitter as yourself, as a scientist, and don't post like, I don't know, silly things. It's just for science. Lastly, if you have any questions at any point as you're preparing for grad school, you can send us an email. We just created this email, mbresearchut@gmail. You can send it anonymously if you want to, but we just want to be a resource for you if you have any questions about you don't know how to find a research position at UT, you don't know how to find a grad school position, you can email us at any time, and there's a slew of people that we would be happy to help walk you through this, because we just want to be helpful and guide you through the process, because it can be really confusing. It was really confusing for me the first time, because especially if you're first generation science, it's just, there's not a lot of information out there. So definitely feel free to email us for help. So we touched on this a little bit during the Q&A, but if you are working other jobs and you are questioning if you have time to work a research position at UT because you need to make money and they only want volunteers, we are, as a department, heavily advocating already to pay our undergrads, and there are some labs here at UT that do pay their undergrads, and I think it's a fair thing to expect. However, not every lab has the funds to do that. So in the case that you find a great lab you want to join and you want to work in it, but they can't fund you, you might be somewhat aware of these already, but Tejas is a need-based scholarship. So if you are on financial aid at all, that's all you really need to get the scholarship, and it will fund you to do research. I think you only have to commit to 10 hours a week, and then they'll pay your stipend to do research as an undergrad at UT. And then TIDES or LSAMP will give you scholarships, either for you being a researcher or for you to buy things for your research. So I would look into applying for Tejas, applying for TIDES, and it might seem like a little bit of extra work, but if you're already working so much, you might as well get paid for it. And lastly, you should be getting paid to go to grad school. And some of the time when you reach out to a professor and you say, I really like what you do, are you taking grad students next year? And they say, we don't have any funding. There are some ways that you can still get your own funding. One of the ways is you can go to profellow.com and you can search through a whole bunch of different fellowships. The biggest one, the NSF GRFP, if you haven't heard it already, I highly recommend typing that into Google and reading through that entire thing, because I believe that every single person going into grad school needs to apply for the NSF GRFP. It's a good fellowship, and they give out hundreds every single year, so it's competitive, sure, but like there's a good chance you can get it. And if you're applying for the NSF GRP as an undergrad and you want any feedback on any of your materials, then we can also provide that for you. The Ford Foundation Fellowship, if you want to go into any science, it's only for underrepresented minorities. It pays the same amount as the NSF. I think they just give out a few less fellowships, but definitely still a contender. The LSAMP Bridge to the Doctorate is a fellowship that I had. So if you had any LSAMP experience as an undergrad, you qualify for this Bridge to the Doctorate. It pays as much as the NSF GRP and the Ford Foundation, but it's only for 2 years. And then the Ray Diversity Fellowship is specifically for conservation and clean energy. So these are a few things that you could look up, Google, figure out how to apply for those. And if you need any help applying for them, we'd be happy to walk you through it, or happy to read your cover letter, your personal statements, or your research proposals, or whatever you need to prepare yourself for grad school. Is Sophia, are you there? I know Sophia was having internet problems or computer problems, but we have a website now, minorities in biological research.weebly.com. You can check it out because we're going to try to post more information on there. We're going to post our recordings on there. We have a pamphlet on there about getting into grad school you might be interested in. And we're going to post when we have our next workshops. And they're not all going to be the same thing. We're not going to always talk about getting into grad school. So one way that you can help guide us to talk about something that's relevant for you is you can fill out our post-workshop survey and just say like, what if you want us to cover something else, if you have questions about anything else. If you fill it out in there, then we'd be happy to help you out design a different workshop based on something else that you are interested in. So Sophia, are you still having problems?
Hi, sorry, I'm here, but you can go ahead and go without me because I'm calling in from my phone.
Okay. Well, I think I don't have the itinerary open on the side or anything, but did we have anything else to cover? I think that might be it for today. Yes, but I can stop it.